The day my stepmother left, she didn't slam the door. She didn't take anything either, not the jewelry, not the wedding photos. Not even the porcelain mug she always drank from at dawn. She just walked out barefoot, leaving the smell of something scorched behind her. By the time my father noticed, the coffee on the stove had boiled over. Black streaks crawling down the sides of the pot like veins. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just stared at the front door, then at me. "Did you see her go?" he asked. I shook my head. No. But that wasn't true. I'd seen her hours earlier, standing in the backyard barefoot, the morning fog curling around her ankles. She was holding a matchbook, his matchbook, the one from their honeymoon hotel. She struck one, watched the flame crawl toward her fingers, and dropped it into the grass before it burned out. Then she looked up at the house, at the bedroom window, at me watching her through it, and smiled. Her name was Claire, though my father liked to call her Clara, as if softening her made her more his. She'd been in our lives for 6 years, long enough to become furniture, short enough to remain unfamiliar. I was 17 when she married him, old enough to recognize the kind of woman who could hold her pain like a secret weapon. She was beautiful, but never in a way that comforted you. People described her as composed. I always thought she looked like someone mid-escape. After she left, the house began to unravel in quiet ways. Curtains stayed drawn. The radio played static. My father stopped opening mail. And then the smell started, a faint, bitter trace of smoke that never seemed to come from anywhere specific. I asked once, "Did something burn?" He said, "Just memories." But I didn't believe him. 2 nights later, I found the first clue she'd left behind. It wasn't a note or a photo, nothing sentimental. It was a small pile of ash in the sink, arranged in the shape of a ring. Around it, the faint outline of her lipstick, like she'd kissed the metal before burning something inside. I touched it, half expecting it to be warm. It wasn't, just cold dust. When I told my father, he looked at me too long before saying, "Don't go looking for ghosts, Adam. Let her be gone." But the thing about ghosts is, they don't need permission to stay. The next day, a letter arrived addressed to me. No return address, no signature. Inside, a single piece of paper and a short line written in Claire's delicate, looping script. "Every fire starts with a kindness ignored." No greeting, no explanation, just that. I showed it to my father. He read it once, folded it neatly, and said, "Throw it away." I didn't. I kept it in my desk drawer. That night, the smell of smoke returned, stronger this time, thick enough to sting my throat. I followed it downstairs and found the fireplace glowing. Not with fire, but with the faint light of burning paper, letters, dozens of them. My father stood over the flames, watching them curl. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Cleaning up," he said. "Her letters?" He didn't answer. I stepped closer. Among the ashes, one envelope refused to catch. I reached for it, but he stopped me. His grip was hard, desperate. "Leave it," he said. But when he turned away, I snatched it from the fire. In my room, I opened it carefully. Inside were 2 photographs, both of my father. One taken years ago, in his office, smiling at someone outside the frame. The other was newer, printed in black and white. Same angle, same pose, same half smile, but behind him, in the reflection of a window, Claire stood watching. She wasn't smiling. She was holding a lighter. On the back of the second photo, in the same looping handwriting, she'd written, "You can't erase what you refuse to confess." The next morning, I woke to find my father's car gone, his phone on the counter, and the faint scent of smoke drifting through the hall again. Claire was gone, yes. But whatever she'd set on fire, it was still burning. And it had only just begun to spread. By the time my father came back, it was already dark. His shirt smelled like rain and something bitter, metallic. He dropped his car keys onto the counter, sat down and said nothing. The kitchen light hummed above us like an accusation. "Where were you?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. "Nowhere that matters." His hands were shaking. Not from drink, not from age, something deeper. Guilt, maybe. I placed the photograph on the table. "Then tell me what this is." He didn't touch it. He just stared, jaw tight. "You shouldn't have that." "Why? Because she left it for me?" He looked up then, eyes hollow, voice low. "Because she wants you to take her side." "I don't even know what her side is," I said. "Maybe you should tell me before she does." He laughed, short and broken. "Her side is always the same, ruin and regret." He stood and walked out of the room. But when he opened the door to his office, I saw what he'd been hiding, boxes stacked along the wall, each labeled in his neat handwriting. Claire 2014, 2015, 2016. Inside were binders of bank records, receipts, photographs, and handwritten notes. Whatever she'd burned, he'd kept copies. That night, I went through them while he slept. The papers told a story that didn't fit the marriage I thought they'd had. Transfers to offshore accounts. Business trips that weren't business. A property deed in Claire's maiden name, purchased the same year she married him. And tucked into one folder, a police report. It was from 7 years ago. A fire. An old warehouse outside the city. Cause, electrical malfunction. Casualties, 1. The signature at the bottom of the witness statement made my stomach twist. Claire Addison. The next day, I drove to the address listed on the report. The warehouse was still there, charred brick, windows blackened, grass reclaiming the lot. The gate hung crooked, rusted shut. A woman was waiting by the entrance. Late 40s, raincoat, cigarette. She looked like she'd been expecting me. "You're Adam," she said. "Her stepson." I hesitated. "Who are you?" "Detective Marianne Holt," she said. "Retired. I worked the case." She studied my face for a moment. "You look like him." "My father?" She nodded. "He was there that night. But you already guessed that, didn't you?" I swallowed. "Why would he be?" She flicked ash onto the ground. "Because it wasn't an accident. And because your stepmother took the blame." I stared at her. "What are you saying?" "That your father started the fire," she said. "And Claire made sure no one ever proved it." When I got home, the house felt smaller, walls leaning inward. My father was at the table again, a half-empty glass beside him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. He looked at me without surprise. "Because it's not true." "Then tell me what is." He didn't. Instead, he opened the drawer and pulled out a photograph, the same one I'd found. Only older. In this one, Claire was standing beside him, arm linked through his, smiling. "She was supposed to be my second chance," he said quietly. "Instead, she became my punishment." "She protected you," I said. "That fire, she covered for you." He didn't deny it. "Why?" I asked. His voice cracked. "Because she loved me. And because she thought I could change." "And could you?" He stared into his glass. "I guess we're about to find out." That night, I woke to the smell of smoke again. It wasn't faint this time. It was thick, real. I ran downstairs, nothing burning. The smell came from outside. On the porch, a small metal tin sat beside the door. Inside were burned scraps of paper and another note. He told you half the story. I'm ready to finish it. No signature, but at the bottom, a lipstick mark. Her color, her shape. Claire had come back, or she'd never really left. And for the first time, I wondered if the fire she started years ago was never meant to destroy him, only to test which of us would burn next. 2 days passed before I saw her again. Long enough for the house to sink back into its usual rhythm of denial. My father stopped going to work. He'd sit by the window with the curtains half drawn, smoking cigars he used to hate. Staring into the same patch of trees like he expected them to answer. When the knock came, I already knew who it was. She stood on the porch in a gray coat, hood down, rain in her hair. The same lipstick. The same calm. "Hi, Adam," she said softly. I didn't let her in right away. "You shouldn't be here." "I was never really gone," she said, smiling faintly. "Can I come in?" Her voice had always been a weapon, sharp and low enough to sound like honesty. I opened the door. The moment she stepped inside, the smell of smoke returned. Not from her clothes, not from any fire, just from her. It clung to her like memory. My father came down the stairs, stopped halfway when he saw her. His face went pale. "You have some nerve," he said. Claire tilted her head. "And you have some luck." They closed the case before anyone asked the right questions. "What do you want?" She looked at me, not him. "To make sure he finally tells you the truth." "I already know what you think it is," I said. She laughed quietly. "You think I took the blame for him because I loved him? That's cute." She walked closer until the space between them felt electric. "I took the blame because I was there first." My father's voice was low, almost pleading. "Don't do this." "Do what?" she said. "Tell him I started the fire before you could?" I blinked. "Wait, what?" She turned to me. "He came later, Adam. He tried to stop it, but I'd already lit the fuse." I looked at my father. "Is that true?" He closed his eyes. "We were both there." Claire nodded. "He just remembers it differently." They told the story in pieces, like two witnesses describing the same ghost. 7 years ago, they'd invested together in a storage facility on the outskirts of town. It was a shell company, a front for someone else's money. When that money disappeared, the building caught fire. He said it was insurance fraud, Claire said. I called it survival. My father's hands were shaking. "You lit it, Claire. People were inside." "One man," she said. "A guard who wasn't supposed to be there." "You knew that." "I didn't know you'd actually go through with it." "You didn't stop me either." The room pulsed with silence. I stepped back. "So both of you lied to the police?" Claire nodded. "I took the fall because I could. He had a son, a reputation, a future. I had a lighter." My father's voice cracked. "And now you're here for revenge?" She looked at me again. "No, for witnesses." I should have thrown her out. Instead, I poured 3 glasses of water and sat down. "So what now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "I finish what I started." She slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on there, the files, the recordings, the bank transfers. It proves what we both did." My father shook his head. "You'll destroy us." "No," she said softly. "You already did that. I'm just lighting the last match." He lunged for the drive, but I grabbed it first. For a moment, all 3 of us froze, our hands almost touching. The tension humming like a live wire. Then she smiled at me, that dangerous, familiar smile. "You get to decide, Adam. Which truth do you want to keep? That night, I couldn't sleep. The drive sat on my desk, small and heavy as guilt. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would show. The flames, the deal, the debt. At 3 a.m., I went downstairs. My father was asleep in the chair. Cigarette burned out in his hand. Claire's coat was gone from the hook. She'd vanished again, but this time, the smell of smoke came from outside. Through the window, I saw it, a thin column rising from the woods behind the house. Bright against the dark. I ran toward it barefoot, the wet grass cold underfoot. When I reached the clearing, I saw what she'd done. The boxes, every binder, every copy of every lie, they were burning. Flames tore through the evidence, orange light licking the air. And in the middle of it, Claire stood perfectly still, watching. I shouted her name. She turned once, met my eyes, and said only, "Now it's fair." Then she walked away into the trees, leaving me with the heat, the ash. And the one truth the fire hadn't destroyed. Every secret burns differently, but they all leave the same kind of smoke. The fire died before dawn. By the time the first light touched the trees, all that remained were blackened stumps and the faint hiss of cooling earth. I stood there until the air stopped trembling. The smell of smoke clung to me, sharp and sweet, like something that wanted to stay. My father didn't come looking. When I returned to the house, he was sitting in the kitchen with his old lighter on the table, turning it over and over in his hands. "She burned it all," I said. He didn't look up. "Good. Maybe that's what we deserve. She said you were trying to stop her that night." He smiled faintly, bitter. "She'd say that. Makes the story prettier. So which one of you's lying?" "Both," he said, "just in different ways." For the next few days, the house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. Reporters started calling again, some story about the reopened warehouse case. But I ignored them. I didn't know what truth they wanted anymore, or if telling it would even change anything. Then, on the fifth night, I found a note slipped under the door. My name on the outside, no address. Inside, a single line in her looping script. "I left you something that can't burn." No signature, just ash smudged along the edges, as if she'd written it beside the fire. I drove to her old cottage by the lake. The place looked abandoned, windows boarded, weeds reclaiming the porch. But inside, beneath a loose floorboard, I found it, an envelope wrapped in cloth. Inside were photographs, her and my father at the warehouse site years ago. Arms around each other, smiling at a future they must have known couldn't last. There was one more photo too, me. A candid from a family barbecue, laughing at something off camera. On the back, she'd written, "You were the only one who didn't need to lie to survive." At the bottom of the envelope was a key. I didn't recognize it. Taped to it was a small tag, "Safety Deposit Box number 213. I didn't tell my father. The next morning, I drove to the old downtown bank. The clerk hesitated when I handed over the key but eventually disappeared into the back end. Returned with a small metal box. Inside was a stack of papers and a flash drive. The papers were legal, wills, account closures, property transfers. But the flash drive held something else. Video files. The first opened to a dimly lit room. Claire sat in front of the camera, her face calm, her hair tied back. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I've already finished what we started." She took a breath. I lied to protect him. Then I told the truth to hurt him. Now I'm doing neither. I'm just leaving what's real. She looked straight at the lens. "We burned everything to keep you clean, Adam. Don't waste it. Don't inherit our ashes." Then she smiled, small, tired, real, and the screen went black. When I got home, my father was gone. His lighter was still on the table, cold now. In his place, a note in his careful handwriting. I thought I could bury what we did, but she was right, fire never stays buried. Take what's left and do better. He'd signed it simply, Dad. The police found his car by the lake later that evening. Door open, keys still in the ignition. They never found him. I buried the lighter behind the house, under the blackened trees. As the dirt fell, I thought of both of them, their love built from gasoline. Their lives measured in what they destroyed. And yet, beneath all that ruin, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the closest they ever came to peace. When I went back inside, I opened Claire's letter again, the one she'd left me. The ashes along the edge had faded into soft gray dust, easy to wipe away. Maybe that was her final lesson. Some things don't end in flames. They just cool, quietly, until what's left is soft enough to touch. I closed the window, letting the wind scatter what remained across the floor. The house didn't smell of smoke anymore. Only rain. Rain blurred the days that followed. I stopped checking the mailbox. The house no longer groaned when the wind hit it. It only sighed. The smell of smoke had finally vanished, replaced by damp wood and the faint sweetness of rot. People asked about my father, about Claire. I told them the same thing, they're gone. Not missing, not dead. Just gone. It seemed truer that way. But the quiet didn't last. One morning, a small package arrived on the porch. No return address. I recognized the handwriting before I touched it, hers. Claire's. Inside was a small matchbox. Not new, used, stained, the paper sleeves singed along the edges. Inside were 3 matches left, and a note folded neatly beneath them. You can't keep the fire out forever, Adam. You just have to decide what to burn. I stared at it until my hands began to tremble. I didn't know if it was a warning or an invitation. That night, I dreamed of her again. Not as she'd been, sharp, deliberate, dangerous, but as she looked in the video, calm. Almost kind. She stood in the middle of our old kitchen, sunlight spilling across her face. And said, everything that burns wants to be seen. When I woke, the clock read 3:17 a.m. The house was dark, still. Then, from the hallway, came a soft metallic sound, like a hinge turning. I followed it to the study. The window was open. Rain fell sideways against the sill. And on the desk sat another envelope, soaked through. Inside was a single photograph, my father and Claire at the lake, taken from behind. They were holding hands, standing near the edge where the reeds grew thick. The photo was recent. I touched the wet paper. My throat closed. They were alive, or at least, one of them was. The next morning, I drove to the lake. The sky was gray, the water restless. I followed the shoreline until I reached the old dock, the same one where they'd once taken me fishing, the same place where the police had found his car weeks ago. The boards were slick with algae, the air cold enough to bite. I walked to the end and waited, though I didn't know for what. Then I saw it. Smoke. Not much, just a thin trail rising from the tree line beyond the dock. I followed it through the woods, heart pounding, until I reached a clearing. A small cabin stood there, half collapsed, the roof caved in on one side. The door was open. Inside, a single chair faced the fireplace. On it sat Claire. Her eyes met mine, steady, almost peaceful. You came, she said. I got your note. I thought you might. The fire crackled weakly beside her, feeding on a few pieces of old wood. On the mantel sat a photograph frame turned face down. Is he here? I asked. She smiled faintly. He was. I stepped closer. What happened? The same thing that always happens, she said. He wanted to be forgiven. I wanted to be remembered. The fire wanted both. Her hands were trembling slightly, resting in her lap. You're sick, I said quietly. She looked down at her fingers, the skin pale, thin. We all are, Adam. Just in different ways. She nodded toward the frame. I turned it over. Inside was the same photo from the porch, her and my father at the lake, but this time. The image was burned around the edges, curling inward, the two of them dissolving into smoke. He didn't suffer, she said softly. Not more than we already had. I froze. You. I didn't kill him, she said, cutting me off. We made a choice. He went into the water before the fire took the house. He said it was cleaner that way. Her voice didn't shake, but mine did. Why tell me? Because someone has to keep the story from catching fire again. She stood slowly, her face drawn, eyes bright with something like peace. You can go now, Adam. I've done enough burning for both of us. I left her there. I should have called someone, police, anyone, but I didn't. By the time I reached the road, the smoke behind me had thickened. The air filling with the sound of wood collapsing. The cabin was gone by morning. Back home, I placed the matchbox on the kitchen counter and stared at it. The 3 remaining matches looked almost innocent. I took one out, struck it. The flame bloomed small, warm, alive. I held it until it touched my skin, then blew it out before it could hurt. The smell of burnt sulfur lingered in the air, sharp, temporary, human. I understood then what Claire had meant. The fire was never about destruction. It was about proof that something once existed. Proof that warmth could still come from ruin. I placed the matchbox back on the windowsill beside the dirt-stained lighter I'd dug up from the yard. 2 relics, harmless now. Outside, the rain began again, steady and clean. For the first time, the house didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like air. And when I caught my reflection in the dark window, my mouth moved without meaning to, forming a small, quiet smile. Her smile. The last fire still burning, but only in memory. The house has grown quieter than ever. But it isn't the silence of grief anymore, it's the silence of something finished. The kind that settles only after every noise has burned itself out. The matchbox sits on the windowsill where the morning light hits it. Sometimes I imagine I can still smell smoke. But it's probably just the wood of the old floorboards. The damp walls remembering what they've lived through. I don't open the box anymore. I just keep it there. Proof of something that once had heat. It's been 3 months since the fire at the lake. The police never called it arson. The cabin's remains sank into the earth with the last of the rain. They found no bodies, only ash mixed with sand, glass melted into unfamiliar shapes. They asked me questions, of course. About my father. About Claire. I said what I had to. They were gone long before the fire. The detective didn't argue. He just nodded and closed the file. It felt like the final page of a story no one wanted to finish reading. I moved back into the city, into a small apartment above a bookstore. I started teaching creative writing part-time. Stories, structure, character motivation. It felt strange, explaining to students how to build meaning when all I'd known was how to survive it. On my desk sits the same photograph Claire left behind, the one burned along the edges. Her hand in my father's, the lake behind them. When I first found it, I thought it was about love. Now I think it's about surrender. Some nights, when the shop below closes and the streets go still, I take it out and hold it under the lamp. The burn marks look like halos in the right light. I got a letter last week. No return address. Inside, a single sentence. We don't disappear, we just change color. No name, no signature. But the handwriting, hers. I sat there for a long time, tracing the letters with my thumb. The ink had bled slightly, as if it had been written in the rain. Was she alive? Had she sent it? Or was it just her way of making sure she stayed in the room, even when she was gone? I didn't look for answers. I'd learned that every time I chased her ghosts, I ended up breathing smoke again. Instead, I pinned the note to the corkboard above my desk, beside my class syllabi. The grocery list, the electric bill. Her words looked almost ordinary there, almost harmless. This morning, a student asked me why all my stories end in fire. I told her they don't. They end in what comes after, the moment the smoke clears and people realize they're still alive. She smiled. So you like happy endings? I thought about it. No, I said, just true ones. That night, I walked to the river. The water was calm, reflecting the city lights like pieces of broken glass. I took the matchbox from my pocket. One last time. I struck a single match. It flared, small and bright, the flame trembling in the wind. I watched it until it bent, then dropped it into the water. The hiss was soft, almost tender. No smoke, no ashes, just steam. I stood there until the river swallowed the last ripple. Then I turned back toward the city. The streetlights flickered in the distance, pale and cold. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of the quiet anymore. The fire had taught me what the cold never could, that sometimes survival isn't about escaping the burn, but about learning to live in the light that comes after it. And when I looked down at my reflection in the dark water, it didn't look like hers anymore. It looked like mine.